Gwen slid a folder across the table. "We know you run a secret company on company time," she said. "You are terminated effective immediately." I looked at Trent, our vice president, watching his smug smile grow. I did not argue. I just smiled back and said, "You are absolutely right. I really should focus on my own company." They had no idea my second job was the exact entity keeping their corporation from collapsing. "My name is Rebecca. I am 33 years old. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had a toxic boss try to steal your credit." It was Monday morning at Vanguard Logistics. As Director of Supply Chain Strategy, I was essentially the highly paid janitor for executive incompetence. I barely set down my bag when two security guards appeared. They gestured toward the Human Resources office. Gwen, the HR director, sat waiting. Next to her was Trent. He was a classic nepotism hire built on empty corporate buzzwords with absolutely zero understanding of how a supply chain operated. Gwen dropped a fabricated file onto the table. "We tracked your network activity, Rebecca," she stated. "We have concrete evidence you operate a private enterprise during contracted hours. This is a gross violation and grounds for immediate dismissal." I sat there. For 6 years, I was the invisible backbone of Vanguard. I pulled 80-hour work weeks. I sacrificed personal relationships to fix mistakes by Trent before the board noticed. In corporate America, I had learned a brutal lesson. The person who does the actual heavy lifting gets crushed under the weight of endless expectations, while the person who knows how to steal the credit walks away with a massive bonus. Trent had built his entire executive career by standing directly on my shoulders. Now Trent leaned forward, pressing his manicured hands flat against the glass table. He wore an arrogant smirk, clearly believing he had just orchestrated the perfect corporate assassination. "We are going to need your master administrative access to Project Titan immediately," he demanded. "Hand over the credentials right now, pack up your desk quietly, and we might decide not to sue you for corporate theft." Project Titan was the undisputed crown jewel of Vanguard Logistics. It was a highly advanced artificial intelligence logistics system that optimized global shipping routes, managed warehouse inventory in real time, and predicted supply chain disruptions before they happened. Vanguard was currently bleeding cash due to terrible upper management decisions, and Project Titan was the only functional system keeping the company from drowning in a sea of bankruptcy. Trent thought he had pulled off a brilliant masterstroke. By firing me, he believed he could take full control of Project Titan, present it to the board of directors as his own brainchild, and secure his promotion to chief operating officer. He assumed Vanguard owned the software. He blindly assumed that the custom code I had integrated into our servers belonged to the company simply because I was a salaried employee. He was entirely unaware that Project Titan was a protected third-party system. More specifically, he was completely oblivious to the fact that my unauthorized side business was the very company that owned the exclusive license to that software. I looked down at the termination papers Gwen slid across the table toward me. I slowly read through the standard clauses, the non-disclosure agreements, and the forfeiture of my severance package due to termination with cause. I picked up the heavy metal pen resting on the table. "Are you entirely sure this is the route you want to take, Trent?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "The system is extremely delicate. It requires a highly specific understanding of external protocols to function properly." Trent scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest in a defensive posture. "Do not flatter yourself, Rebecca. We have an entire information technology department at our disposal. You are entirely replaceable. Just write down the administrative passwords on this notepad and leave the building." I did not write down the passwords. I signed the termination papers with a swift, confident flourish, uncapped my employee badge from the lapel of my blazer, and placed it gently on top of the legal documents. "You are absolutely right, Trent," I said, pushing the heavy leather chair back and standing up to my full height. "I really should dedicate all my energy and focus to my other business venture. I wish you the absolute best of luck managing Project Titan without my daily intervention." Gwen looked slightly confused by my unnervingly calm demeanor, but Trent just let out a harsh laugh. "Security will escort you out immediately," he commanded, already turning his attention to his expensive smartphone. You have exactly 5 minutes to collect your personal items. Do not even try to touch your computer or log into the network. I walked back to my desk with 2 guards trailing behind me. The office was dead silent. Dozens of my coworkers stared at their computer screens, far too afraid of the boss to make eye contact or offer sympathy. I packed a few framed photographs, my favorite coffee mug, and a plant into a cardboard box. I did not need to touch my computer. I did not need to delete confidential files or format hard drives. The trap was perfectly set, and they had just walked right into it. As the glass doors of Vanguard Logistics slid shut behind me, the morning sun hit my face and a massive weight lifted from my shoulders. I walked to my car, placed the box in the passenger seat, and took a deep breath of outside air. They genuinely thought they had just discarded a problematic, insubordinate employee. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed the keys to their entire corporate empire directly over to their absolute worst nightmare. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan and stared through the windshield at the towering glass facade of Vanguard Logistics. The morning traffic hummed in the distance. I placed the cardboard box on the passenger seat. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. I picked it up and watched the notifications roll in one by one. The Vanguard Enterprise application on my home screen grayed out. My corporate email account instantly refreshed and displayed a blank screen with an access denied message. Gwen and her human resources team were highly efficient when it came to erasing someone from the company directory. They wiped my digital footprint from the Vanguard servers within 4 minutes of my departure from the boardroom. They thought this was a standard termination procedure. They assumed they were simply tying up loose ends and locking out a disgruntled former employee. What they failed to understand was the crushing reality of the corporate scapegoat dynamic they had created. For the past 6 years, I was the invisible force holding Vanguard together. I was the one who skipped family holidays to fix catastrophic shipping errors. I was the one who answered frantic phone calls at 3 in the morning when the supply chain failed. The corporate world is a brutal ecosystem where hard work is rewarded with more work and mediocrity is shielded by executive titles. Trent suffocated me with his relentless micromanagement. He demanded daily reports on tasks he did not comprehend and took credit for every successful strategy I implemented. Vanguard Logistics was a sinking ship, steered by executives who cared more about their country club memberships than their operational efficiency. I refused to let my entire professional life be consumed by that toxic environment. While Vanguard executives slept, I spent my nights building my own empire. I poured every ounce of my frustration into coding and developing a logistics platform that could do the work of 100 supply chain managers. I wanted to escape the rat race. I wanted to build a sanctuary where talent and innovation actually mattered. That was how Project Titan was born. It was not just a piece of software, it was my exit strategy. It was a highly advanced automated system designed to predict market fluctuations, reroute freight ships in real time, and eliminate warehouse bottlenecks. Vanguard desperately needed it to survive, and I integrated it seamlessly into their aging infrastructure under the guise of an internal optimization project. Trent never asked how the new system worked. He only cared that the quarterly profit margins suddenly looked spectacular under his leadership. He blindly assumed Vanguard owned the proprietary rights to the software. He never bothered to read the technical documentation I provided. If he had, he would have noticed the licensing agreements. He would have seen that Project Titan was entirely owned and operated by an external vendor named Aura Dynamics. And if he had done a simple public records search, he would have discovered that I was the sole founder of that company. Now, Trent and Gwen had just executed the most catastrophic mistake in Vanguard history. By officially revoking my employee access, they triggered a massive automated security protocol. Project Titan was programmed with strict compliance measures. The software was tethered directly to my unique administrative credentials to ensure the intellectual property remained secure. The moment the Human Resources Department scrubbed my employee identification number from the Vanguard Active Directory, the synchronization link between the Vanguard servers and Project Titan began to uncouple. I sat in my car and opened a secure application on my personal tablet. A complex dashboard materialized on the screen displaying lines of rapidly scrolling data. I watched in absolute fascination as the system initiated the decoupling phase. The automated protocol was beautiful in its cold efficiency. It did not shut down the logistics network immediately. A sudden crash would trigger external failsafes. Instead, the system initiated a controlled 36-hour purge. It was a slow, methodical unbinding of every data node and operational pathway I had established over the past 2 years. The countdown had officially begun. In exactly 36 hours, Vanguard Logistics would face a total operational collapse. The artificial intelligence that currently managed their fleet of 5,000 transport trucks would simply vanish. The automated warehouse routing system would revert to the outdated manual protocols from a decade ago. Their entire global supply chain would grind to a brutal, horrifying halt. Millions of dollars in freight would be stranded at shipping ports across the country. Shipping containers filled with perishable goods would spoil on the docks because the temperature control algorithms would disconnect. International shipping manifests would instantly scramble, turning an organized global supply chain into a massive, unreadable digital puzzle. Trent probably thought he was having a victorious morning. I imagined him sitting in his lavish corner office, sipping his expensive espresso and drafting an arrogant email to the board of directors. He would undoubtedly claim that he had bravely eliminated a problematic employee to streamline departmental efficiency. He would assure them that Project Titan was running perfectly under his direct supervision. He had no idea he was sitting on a ticking time bomb. I turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I had dedicated my entire 30s to keeping that corporation afloat while enduring relentless disrespect. I had sacrificed my mental health to ensure Trent received his unearned accolades. They wanted to discard me like a broken piece of office equipment. They wanted to assert their dominance and remind me of my place in their corporate hierarchy. They made a fatal miscalculation. I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway. The city skyline gleamed under the morning sun. I was no longer a suffocated corporate subordinate, desperately trying to please a toxic boss. I was a chief executive officer, heading toward my actual headquarters. Vanguard Logistics had exactly 1 day and a half to realize their entire business model was evaporating into thin air. I smiled at the thought of the absolute panic that would soon sweep through their executive suites. Every single route adjustment, every automated vendor payment, and every cargo manifest would simply cease to exist. They had taken my dedication for granted for far too long. I turned up the radio and drove toward the financial district, ready to watch the dominoes fall. The corporate world was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true cost of unearned arrogance. After a highly productive afternoon operating from my actual corporate headquarters, I parked my car outside an upscale steakhouse downtown. It was Monday evening, and the crisp air held a bitter chill. I was scheduled to attend a dinner celebrating the wedding anniversary of my parents, Helen and Mitchell. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant, navigating past the host stand and the dimly lit bar area. The dining room was a sea of crystal chandeliers, white linen tablecloths, and hushed conversations. I spotted my family sitting at a large circular booth near the back window overlooking the city skyline. My mother, Helen, wore a tailored designer dress and a string of pearls that cost more than my first car. She was busy adjusting her perfect posture to ensure she looked affluent from every possible angle. My father, Mitchell, sat beside her, adjusting his expensive silk tie and examining the wine list with a critical eye. Across from them sat my younger sister, Sienna. She was busy taking endless selfies with her phone, holding up a glass of expensive champagne to capture the perfect lighting. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the inevitable performance. I pulled out a chair and sat down, expecting a standard greeting, or perhaps a passive-aggressive comment about the terrible city traffic. I did not even get the chance to unfold my cloth napkin. Mitchell slammed his heavy cocktail glass down onto the table, causing the ice cubes to rattle loudly against the crystal. He did not say hello. He did not ask how my day was. He leaned forward, his face flushed with a mixture of intense anger and deep embarrassment. I played 18 holes with Trent's father this afternoon. Mitchell stated, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. He told me his son had to fire you today for running some unauthorized scam on company time. Care to explain why you decided to completely humiliate this family in front of my peers? I froze for a fraction of a second. I should have anticipated this exact scenario. Mitchell and Trent's father belonged to the same exclusive country club. In their pretentious world, corporate gossip traveled faster than light. News of my termination had reached my parents before I even had the chance to order an appetizer. Helen leaned across the table, her eyes narrowing with intense disdain. "You are an absolute disgrace to the family name," she hissed loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "We raised you to be a dedicated professional, and you throw away a prime position at Vanguard Logistics to play around on the internet. Do you have any idea how bad this makes your father look in front of his important business associates?" I looked at the two people who were supposed to support me unconditionally. They worshipped status and wealth above all else. To Helen and Mitchell, a corporate title at a recognized conglomerate was the only acceptable measure of a person's worth. They had proudly financed every single aspect of Sienna's luxurious life without a single second thought. They gladly paid $250,000 for Sienna's useless degree in liberal arts and her subsequent luxury apartment downtown. Sienna had never worked a day in her life, yet they treated her like royalty. Meanwhile, I had been forced to take out $60,000 in student loans to fund my own education. I fought tooth and nail for every inch of my independence while they pampered and spoiled their golden child. Now I was sitting in a pretentious steakhouse being berated for getting fired from a job that was actively destroying my soul. "You do not understand the situation," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm despite the adrenaline rushing through my veins. "Trent is incompetent. I built a separate company that Vanguard actually needs to survive. They made a massive mistake today by letting me go." Sienna let out a sharp, obnoxious laugh. She placed her phone face down on the table and rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, Rebecca," she mocked, flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Stop acting like you are some brilliant tech visionary. You got caught running a silly little internet side hustle on company time. It is pathetic. You should be entirely embarrassed of yourself." Mitchell pointed a thick, heavy finger directly at my face. "You listen to me very carefully, Rebecca," he demanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "I have spent decades building my sterling reputation in this city. I will not let your reckless, immature behavior jeopardize my standing at the club. Tomorrow morning, you are going to put on your best suit. You are going to drive to the Vanguard headquarters. You are going to walk right into Trent's office, get on your knees, and beg for your job back." I stared at my father in absolute disbelief. "You want me to beg a man who stole my credit and fired me unjustly?" I asked, my voice remaining remarkably steady despite his outrageous demands. "I want you to fix this terrible mess," Mitchell snarled, slamming his fist against the table. "You will apologize to Trent. You will promise to shut down whatever ridiculous hobby you have been wasting your valuable time on. You will do whatever it takes to restore our family reputation, and you will do it immediately without any further arguments." Helen nodded firmly in agreement, crossing her arms over her chest. "Your father is absolutely right. You need to swallow your foolish pride. You are 33 years old, Rebecca. You are single, unemployed, and playing business owner on the internet. It is incredibly sad. Look at your sister. Sienna knows how to conduct herself properly and maintain our standards." I looked at Sienna, who was currently admiring her fresh, expensive manicure. She was 29, completely dependent on our parents' dwindling wealth, and married to a hardworking man she treated like a personal assistant. This was the golden child they wanted me to emulate. They wanted me to bow down to a toxic vice president and abandon my own multi-million-dollar enterprise just so Mitchell could save face on the golf course. The sheer audacity of their demands was breathtaking. They had absolutely no clue that my silly little side hustle was currently orchestrating the total destruction of Vanguard Logistics. They did not know that Trent would be the one begging for his professional life in less than 24 hours. I felt a surge of cold empowerment wash over me. I was not going to cry or defend my choices to people who fundamentally refused to see my true worth. They had made their toxic allegiances perfectly clear today, and I would not forget it. The waiter interrupted the tense silence at our table to take our orders. Sienna did not even glance at the prices printed on the heavy cardstock. She loudly demanded the grand seafood tower to start, followed by a dry-aged Wagyu ribeye and a side of truffle macaroni and cheese. My father Mitchell ordered a $300 bottle of imported Cabernet without batting an eye. My mother Helen requested the lobster thermidor and a specialty cocktail. I simply handed my menu back to the waiter and ordered a basic house salad with a glass of tap water. I had absolutely zero intention of breaking bread with people who had just demanded I grovel to a man who stole my relentless hard work. As soon as the waiter stepped away, Sienna leaned back in the plush leather booth and steered the conversation directly back to her favorite topic, which was herself. Daddy. I completely forgot to tell you, she chirped, swirling her champagne glass under the crystal chandelier. I picked up the new luxury sport utility vehicle this afternoon. The dealership had the exact custom white leather interior I wanted. It drives like an absolute dream on the highway. I put the massive down payment on the platinum card you gave me, just like we discussed earlier this week. Mitchell forced a tight smile that did not quite reach his eyes. That is wonderful, sweetheart, he replied, though his voice strained slightly under the heavy weight of his mounting financial obligations. You deserve the absolute best things in life. Sienna beamed brightly and then immediately turned her predatory gaze toward my side of the table. It is just such a terrible shame you lost your job today, Rebecca, she said, adopting a tone of fake sympathy that made my blood boil. If you had just focused on your actual corporate career instead of playing around with that silly little internet side hustle, you might be able to afford a nice luxury car, too. Maybe you can take the city bus to your unemployment appointments next week. I did not take the obvious bait. I simply took a sip of my water and shifted my attention to the only other person at the table who was remaining completely silent. Elijah sat quietly beside Sienna, his dark eyes absorbing every single word exchanged. Elijah was Sienna's husband, but he was fundamentally nothing like her. As an African-American corporate auditor, he had built his entire career from the absolute ground up. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood where absolutely nothing was handed to him. He worked multiple grueling jobs to put himself through a demanding accounting program and fought his way into a senior management position at one of the top financial firms in the country. Elijah despised the hollow superficiality of my family. He saw right through Mitchell's fragile country club facade and Helen's obsessive need for elevated social status. More importantly, as a highly trained forensic auditor, Elijah was conditioned to spot financial recklessness instantly. He knew exactly how much toxic debt my parents were hiding just to maintain their lavish public lifestyle, and he knew Sienna's reckless spending habits were rapidly accelerating their ruin. Elijah and I rarely spoke deeply at these forced family gatherings, but there was a quiet mutual respect between us. He was a man who valued relentless hard work above all else, and I was the only person in this entire family who actually possessed a genuine work ethic. The dinner dragged on for what felt like hours. I quietly ate my simple salad while listening to Sienna brag endlessly about her upcoming luxury tropical vacations and expensive spa treatments. Helen and Mitchell continued to shoot me glares of deep disappointment, completely oblivious to the fact that their golden child was actively bankrupting them. Finally, the waiter returned and placed a sleek black leather checkbook right in the center of the white tablecloth. Mitchell did not reach for his wallet. Instead, he looked directly at me and pushed the leather booklet across the table until it rested right next to my empty salad bowl. The total printed at the bottom was $1,200. You are going to cover this entire bill tonight, Rebecca, my father stated, his tone completely devoid of any parental warmth. Consider it a small down payment on the massive apology you owe this family for embarrassing me in front of Trent's father today. You have completely ruined the celebratory mood of our anniversary dinner with your terrible, selfish career choices. Helen aggressively nodded in agreement, adjusting her pearl necklace. It is the absolute least you can do, Rebecca. You have been incredibly selfish today. Pay the bill right now and then go home and think very carefully about what your father told you to do tomorrow morning. You need to fix your colossal mistakes. I stared at the leather booklet. The sheer entitlement was absolutely staggering. They wanted an unemployed woman to pay a $1,200 dinner tab for a Wagyu steak and expensive imported wine I did not even touch. I opened my mouth to tell them exactly where they could shove that leather booklet when I noticed a slight movement to my left. Elijah casually leaned forward, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. In one smooth, practiced motion, he reached across the table to grab the silver salt shaker. As his arm crossed directly in front of me, he subtly pushed his half-empty water glass 2 inches to the right. It stopped directly in front of my resting hand. Underneath the heavy crystal base was a small white cocktail napkin folded neatly into a tight square. I kept my face entirely expressionless. I slowly slid my hand forward, pretending to adjust my silverware, and pulled the concealed napkin directly into my lap. I unfolded it under the table, completely away from the prying eyes of my parents. Elijah had scribbled a hurried but precise message in blue ink. Vanguard's financials are bleeding. Trent is drowning. Do not beg. I read the words twice over. A massive surge of adrenaline rushed through my system. Elijah's auditing firm was heavily contracted in the corporate logistics sector. If anyone knew the hidden internal panic happening at Vanguard Logistics right now, it was him. Trent was not sitting comfortably in his corner office. Trent was already drowning in the absolute chaos of the decoupled servers, and Elijah knew exactly what was happening behind closed corporate doors. I looked up from my lap. Elijah was calmly cutting his steak, completely ignoring the toxic tension radiating across the table. He did not look at me directly, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward in the faintest hint of a knowing smile. He knew my true worth, and he was secretly giving me the exact leverage I needed to hold my ground against them. I folded the napkin, placed it inside my purse, and snapped the clasp shut. I reached into my leather wallet and pulled out a single crisp $50 bill. I dropped the green cash directly onto the black leather checkbook. "That covers my house salad and a very generous tip for the waiter," I said, standing up from the plush booth and smoothing out my skirt. "I will not be paying for your luxury steak. Sienna and I will certainly not be apologizing for Trent's catastrophic incompetence tomorrow morning." Mitchell's face turned a violent shade of crimson red. "You sit back down in that chair right now, Rebecca," he demanded, his voice rising aggressively above the ambient noise of the crowded restaurant. "If you walk out that door, you are cutting yourself off from this family. Who is going to pay this massive bill?" I slung my bag over my shoulder and looked down at them with absolute icy clarity. "Figure it out yourselves," I replied smoothly. "Sienna has a brand new platinum card in her designer purse. I am entirely sure she can handle it. Happy anniversary." I turned on my heel and walked straight out of the restaurant without ever looking back. As the heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me, I could clearly hear the muffled, frantic sounds of Mitchell and Sienna arguing loudly over the unpaid check. The cold night air hit my face, and I let out a genuine laugh. The 36-hour countdown was actively ticking down, and I finally had the ultimate inside advantage. I left the cold night air behind and climbed back into my sedan. I did not drive back to my apartment to cry about my toxic family or waste time feeling sorry for myself. I merged onto the expressway and pointed my car toward the downtown financial district. The toxic weight of my parents and their golden child sister was gone. I was no longer the punching bag for their relentless insecurities. I was a successful woman stepping fully into my actual power. I navigated the quiet streets of the financial sector and pulled up to a sleek glass skyscraper. I swiped a black key card at the VIP underground parking garage. The heavy steel gates rolled open instantly. I parked next to the private elevator, scanned my fingerprint, and stepped inside the polished steel cabin. I pressed the button for the 12th floor. The elevator ascended smoothly, lifting me far away from the corporate drama of Vanguard Logistics. The steel doors slid open seamlessly, revealing a brightly lit reception area. Mounted on the imported marble wall was a massive polished silver sign. It read Aura Dynamics in bold, sleek lettering. This was my silly little internet side hustle. My parents thought I spent my evenings playing on a cheap laptop in a cramped apartment. Sienna thought I was running some pathetic internet blog. They were entirely wrong. I founded Aura Dynamics, anonymously, exactly 4 years ago. I built this company from absolute scratch, using the supply chain algorithms Vanguard desperately needed but refused to fund. Today, Aura Dynamics was a thriving multi-million-dollar technology firm. Project Titan was our undisputed crown jewel. We retained absolute ownership of the proprietary algorithms. Vanguard Logistics was not our employer. They were simply our biggest corporate client and entirely dependent on our upcoming merger contract to survive the fiscal year. Trent thought he was firing a low-level employee to steal her project. He had absolutely no idea he had just terminated the sole founder and chief executive officer of the very software firm holding his fragile supply chain together. He had effectively declared war on the one person who controlled the digital keys to his corporate kingdom. I walked past the glass conference rooms and headed straight toward my corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the city. My desk was a beautiful slab of dark walnut covered in multiple high-resolution monitors displaying real-time data streams. I dropped my purse onto the leather sofa and walked over to the small espresso machine. I needed a strong cup of coffee to prepare for the absolute chaos that was about to unfold. Before the espresso machine finished brewing, my lead developer rushed into my office. His name was Victor, and he was the brilliant technical mind who helped me build the core infrastructure of Project Titan. Victor held a sleek tablet in his hands, looking incredibly confused. He walked over to my desk and tapped the screen frantically, bringing up a massive wall of scrolling red text. "Rebecca, we have a massive critical error flashing across the Vanguard network," Victor said, his voice tight with concern. "The system just flagged a major security breach. Vanguard's Human Resources Department officially revoked the active credentials for their lead Vanguard liaison. The system interpreted this as a hostile takeover attempt and automatically initiated the decoupling sequence. Vanguard is currently locked out of the entire global routing network." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my fresh espresso. The lead Vanguard liaison was the fake internal title I created to mask my true identity while I installed the software on their servers. When Gwen and Trent gleefully deleted my employee profile from their Active Directory this morning, they unknowingly triggered the exact security protocol Victor was staring at. "Are they completely disconnected, Victor?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Victor nodded quickly, scrolling through the diagnostics report on his tablet. "The primary synchronization link is completely severed. They have zero access to the automated freight routing modules. The warehouse inventory tracking systems are currently operating blind. If we do not manually override the security protocol and restore their network access immediately, their entire global supply chain is going to collapse in less than 36 hours. They will lose millions in stranded freight." Victor looked at me, waiting for the order to fix the error. He assumed this was a terrible technical mistake made by an incompetent administrator at Vanguard. He assumed we were going to swoop in and save their corporate client from total operational ruin. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about Trent demanding my passwords. I thought about Gwen sliding that fabricated termination file across the table. I thought about my father demanding I beg for a job that was destroying my soul. I turned away from the window and looked into the eyes of my developer. "Do not restore their access, Victor," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet office. Victor blinked in complete surprise, lowering his tablet slowly. "I am sorry, Rebecca," he replied, thinking he had misheard my instructions. "If we do not restore the connection, they are going to experience a total catastrophic failure across their entire network." I walked back over to my desk and placed my empty espresso cup next to my keyboard. "I am entirely aware of the consequences," Victor stated firmly. "The termination of the lead Vanguard liaison was not a glitch. It was a deliberate action taken by their executive team. They broke the terms of our service agreement. We will let the automated security protocol run its full course. Do not answer any of their emergency support tickets. Lock down the external servers and secure the main database." Victor slowly smiled as the reality of the situation dawned on him. He finally understood that this was not a technical error. This was a highly calculated strategic strike. He nodded once, tapped a quick command into his tablet, and turned to leave my office. "Understood, boss," he said quietly, before closing the heavy glass door behind him. I sat down in my leather executive chair and opened my primary monitoring dashboard. The red error messages from the Vanguard servers continued to multiply rapidly across my screen. The 36-hour countdown was actively ticking down, and the destruction of Trent's arrogant career was underway. I leaned back in my chair and watched the beautiful digital fire spread. Let it all burn. Tuesday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train derailing. I sat in my luxurious office at Aura Dynamics, sipping a fresh latte and watching the Vanguard network dashboard light up with critical failure notifications. Across the city inside the Vanguard Logistics headquarters, absolute pandemonium was unfolding. The 36-hour decoupling sequence had reached its first major milestone. The automated routing modules simply vanished from their internal servers. Dispatchers arrived at their desks at 6 in the morning to find completely blank screens. Within an hour, the entire global fleet was paralyzed. 300 transport trucks were stranded at a major port in Los Angeles, unable to receive their loading manifests. 40 freight ships were suddenly floating blindly off the eastern seaboard because their docking coordinates were completely erased. Warehouse managers were screaming into their radios. The artificial intelligence that seamlessly guided their forklifts and inventory scanners was gone, completely replaced by outdated manual prompt screens that nobody knew how to operate. Trent stood in the center of his massive glass-walled office, sweating profusely through his expensive custom-tailored suit. The air conditioning was running on full blast, but beads of cold sweat rolled down his forehead. He stared at his expensive dual monitors with absolute unadulterated horror. Error messages flashed relentlessly across both screens. His office phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree with urgent calls from regional directors, warehouse foremen, and angry corporate clients. Trent was the absolute definition of a classic corporate nepotism hire. He secured his vice president title simply because his wealthy father played golf with the Vanguard board of directors. Trent communicated entirely in hollow corporate buzzwords. He loved to walk into meetings and aggressively demand more synergy, paradigm shifts, and dynamic out-of-the-box thinking. He possessed absolutely zero technical knowledge. He did not even know how to properly format a basic spreadsheet, let alone comprehend the intricate architecture of a highly advanced artificial intelligence logistics system. He fired me yesterday for one very specific reason. His quarterly financial targets were absolutely abysmal. Vanguard was losing money rapidly under his terrible leadership, and he desperately needed a scapegoat to present to the board of directors. He thought he could terminate me, blame the missing revenue on my unauthorized side business, and steal Project Titan to save his own career. He assumed he could proudly present my software as his own brilliant initiative and secure his massive annual bonus. He never stopped to consider how the software actually functioned. Now his brilliant plan was literally imploding right in front of his eyes. Trent frantically slammed his finger on his desk phone, trying to dial the Internal Information Technology Department. When they finally answered, the head of network security told him they were entirely locked out. They explained that the external vendor Aura Dynamics had initiated a massive firewall block. Trent slammed the phone down, his hands shaking violently. He snatched his smartphone from his desk and quickly searched his inbox for the Aura Dynamics corporate contact information. Trent dialed the Aura Dynamics corporate support hotline. It rang exactly 3 times before transferring to our automated voicemail system. Trent paced back and forth across his expensive carpet. "This is Vice President Trent from Vanguard Logistics," he practically shouted into the receiver, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. "We are experiencing a massive technical glitch with your software. I demand that your technical support team resolve this immediately. Call me back the second you get this message." 10 minutes passed. The chaos outside his office grew louder. Another shipping client threatened to cancel a massive contract. Trent dialed the Aura Dynamics hotline again. This time his voice was significantly higher and stripped of its usual arrogance. "This is Trent again," he stammered into the phone, wiping sweat from his upper lip. I need to speak to your chief executive officer immediately. We are willing to negotiate emergency consulting fees. Please have the anonymous founder call my direct cell phone. This is a critical situation. We are bleeding cash. Gwen, the ruthless human resources director, suddenly burst through Trent's office door. She looked entirely unhinged. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and she was clutching a massive stack of thick legal binders to her chest. She slammed the heavy binders onto Trent's desk, knocking over a crystal paperweight. "What on earth is going on, Trent?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "The regional managers are threatening to walk out. The entire eastern seaboard supply chain is frozen." Trent dragged his trembling hands down his face. "Aura Dynamics locked us out," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "The system is completely decoupled. I cannot reach their support team, and their chief executive officer is completely anonymous. They are not returning any of my emergency calls." Gwen frantically opened the largest binder and began flipping aggressively through the heavy pages. "We need to find a legal loophole," she muttered rapidly, tracing her manicured finger down a dense page of legal jargon. "We need to draft an immediate cease and desist letter. We can blame this entire catastrophic outage on a malicious software glitch. We can sue Aura Dynamics for a breach of contract. We just need to prove that their system failed on its own without any internal prompting from our side." She was completely unaware of the massive irony of her statement. Gwen was desperately searching for a legal scapegoat, completely oblivious to the fact that she was the exact person who caused the blackout. Her aggressive human resources protocols triggered the collapse. When she gleefully clicked the button to terminate my employment and erase my Active Directory profile, she personally severed the single connection keeping Vanguard Logistics alive. She and Trent were desperately trying to put out a massive corporate wildfire, having absolutely no idea they were the ones who poured gasoline all over the servers and handed me the match. Tuesday afternoon rolled in with a quiet sense of victory inside my 12th floor office at Aura Dynamics. I spent the hours after lunch analyzing the beautiful destruction of the Vanguard Logistics network. By 2 o'clock, their internal servers were completely gridlocked. I watched the live data feeds on my primary monitor as regional hubs across the Midwest began shutting down their loading docks entirely. The financial damage was already calculating in the millions of dollars. Trent and Gwen were likely running out of ridiculous legal loopholes to explore. They were trapped in a heavy digital cage of their own making, and the walls were rapidly closing in on them. I walked over to the executive break room to pour myself a fresh glass of sparkling water. As I walked back to my desk, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the dark walnut wood. I glanced at the glowing screen and saw my father's name flashing in bold letters. Mitchell was calling me in the middle of a workday, which was highly unusual. He typically reserved his aggressive lectures for weekend dinners or mandatory family holidays where he had a captive audience. I took a slow sip of my water, picked up the phone, and swiped the screen to answer. I did not even get the chance to say hello. Mitchell was already screaming at the absolute top of his lungs before I could lift the phone fully to my ear. His voice was entirely unhinged, vibrating with a level of intense rage I had rarely heard. "What exactly is wrong with you, Rebecca?" he bellowed through the tiny speaker. "I just received a highly disturbing phone call from Trent's father. He is absolutely furious with our family." Trent called him from the Vanguard office in a state of total panic. "Trent claims you maliciously hacked their internal corporate network in a fit of petty revenge because you were fired yesterday. Are you completely out of your mind? Do you have any idea what kind of legal trouble you have just brought upon this family?" I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear and calmly walked over to my leather sofa. I sat down and crossed my legs, completely unfazed by his screaming. Trent was far more pathetic than I originally calculated. Instead of owning up to his colossal executive failure, he ran crying to his wealthy father, who immediately ran crying to my wealthy father. Trent was desperately trying to spin his massive incompetence into a false narrative of corporate sabotage. "Trent is a liar," I replied, my voice completely steady and entirely void of any emotion. "I did not hack anything, Dad. Vanguard revoked my access protocols and their system reacted exactly how it was programmed to react. Trent is currently drowning because he has absolutely no technical knowledge, and he is frantically looking for a scapegoat to save his own dying career. Do not lie to me, Mitchell snapped aggressively, completely ignoring my logical explanation. Trent's father is a highly respected man in this city. He said you installed a malicious virus to destroy their entire supply chain. You are actively humiliating me, Rebecca. You are making me look like a terrible father who raised a vindictive corporate criminal. You are going to march down to the Vanguard headquarters right now and fix whatever malicious code you infected them with. I let out a quiet sigh. Mitchell never cared about the actual truth. He only cared about optics and his fragile reputation at the expensive country club. For my entire life, he used money as a heavy weapon of emotional control. Whenever I stepped out of line or challenged his authority, he immediately weaponized my financial stability. The ultimate tool in his toxic arsenal was the trust fund my grandfather left behind. It was a modest fund, intended to help Sienna and me purchase our first homes or start a small business. However, my grandfather foolishly made Mitchell the sole executor of the estate, which meant Mitchell had absolute legal control over when and how the money was distributed. Mitchell used that trust fund like a loaded weapon pointed directly at my head. He constantly held it over me, forcing my compliance in family matters. He would constantly threaten to withhold my portion if I did not attend specific social events or if I refused to tolerate Sienna's toxic behavior. Meanwhile, he allowed Sienna to drain her portion freely to fund her lavish lifestyle without a single consequence. I am not going to Vanguard, I stated firmly, looking out the large windows at the bright city skyline. I do not work for them anymore. Trent fired me. He can figure out how to route his own freight trucks. Mitchell let out a harsh, cruel laugh. The sound was specifically designed to make me feel small and powerless. You listen to me very carefully. He threatened, his tone dropping into a dangerous, predatory register. I have my estate lawyers on speed dial right now. If you do not go down to that office and beg Trent for forgiveness while fixing his network, I am going to legally dissolve your entire half of your grandfather's trust fund today. I will transfer every single penny of your inheritance directly into Sienna's account. She has been wanting to buy a luxury vacation home in the Hamptons, and your half of the fund will cover the down payment beautifully. Mitchell paused, waiting for the inevitable panic. He expected me to cry. He expected me to desperately backtrack, apologize, and agree to his insane demands just to protect my financial future. He thought the grandfather trust fund was my only safety net in the world, because he still blindly believed I was a broke, unemployed scapegoat playing with an internet side hustle. He had absolutely no idea he was talking to a woman whose actual net worth was rapidly climbing into the tens of millions. He had no idea I was sitting in a 12th-floor executive suite that I owned outright. The trust fund was nothing more than pocket change compared to the massive digital empire I had built entirely in the shadows. I took another sip of my sparkling water, savoring the crisp, cold taste. I felt an overwhelming wave of absolute liberation wash over my entire body. The heavy iron chains of his financial abuse suddenly snapped, completely broken by the sheer weight of my actual success. Do whatever you want with the trust fund, Dad. I said, my voice icy and profoundly calm. Buy Sienna the beach house. Buy her too. I do not need your money, and I never will again. Rebecca, do not you dare speak to me, like Mitchell started to scream again, but I did not let him finish his toxic sentence. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. The call instantly disconnected, plunging my beautiful office back into perfect, peaceful silence. I blocked his phone number, tossed my cell phone onto the leather cushion, and walked back to my desk. The Vanguard dashboard was still glowing bright red with critical errors. Trent was out of options, Mitchell was out of leverage, and I was fully in control. Wednesday morning arrived with heavy rain washing over the financial district. I sat at my dark walnut desk at Aura Dynamics watching the storm hit the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Vanguard logistics dashboard was a solid wall of catastrophic system failures. My private encrypted cell phone buzzed against the polished wood. This was a separate device I used strictly for secure corporate communications. Only 3 people in the entire world possess this specific phone number. I picked up the heavy device, saw an unrecognizable encrypted caller identification tag, and swiped the digital screen to accept the secure connection. "Rebecca, it is Elijah," he said, his deep voice cutting clearly through the encrypted digital static. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, completely surprised by the unexpected call. I had not spoken to my brother-in-law since I walked out of that terrible steakhouse on Monday night, leaving my arrogant parents with a massive unpaid dinner tab. I asked him how he managed to acquire my highly secure corporate contact number. "I am a senior forensic auditor, Rebecca," he replied smoothly, his tone completely professional. "It is my literal job to track down hidden assets and find things that other people are desperately trying to conceal from the public record. We need to talk immediately because the situation is escalating rapidly. I am currently standing inside a soundproof server room at the Vanguard Logistics corporate headquarters." I sat forward, resting my elbows on the thick wood desk. I asked him what his prestigious financial auditing firm was doing inside Trent's crumbling building. "Vanguard triggered a massive financial distress beacon early this morning," Elijah explained, his voice dropping into a low, serious register. "Their entire automated supply chain completely evaporated without a single trace. The resulting financial hemorrhage is so massive that their major investors panicked and forced an immediate emergency audit. My firm was contracted to conduct a rapid overnight damage assessment. I am personally leading the primary investigation team right now." I smiled quietly to myself, staring at the red error messages flashing across my monitor. The universe had a brilliant sense of absolute poetic justice. Trent was desperately trying to hide his massive technical incompetence, but he was completely unaware that the lead investigator tearing through his ruined corporate network was a man who already despised him. I told Elijah that the situation sounded incredibly stressful for the Vanguard executive team. Elijah let out a dry, cynical laugh that echoed slightly in the empty server room. "It is an absolute bloodbath in here," he stated emphatically. "But before we discuss Trent, we need to discuss your sister and your parents. I am officially done with this toxic family, Rebecca. I am executing my permanent exit strategy by the end of this week." I listened intently as Elijah revealed the massive hidden reality of his completely broken marriage. For the past 6 months, he had been quietly conducting a rigorous forensic audit on his own personal finances. He discovered that Sienna had secretly opened massive fraudulent lines of credit using his professional credentials to secure the loans. She was actively bankrupting them to fund her fake luxury lifestyle and designer wardrobes. Furthermore, Elijah discovered that Mitchell was actively helping Sienna hide the fraudulent debt from him. Mitchell was illegally transferring small amounts of money from his own failing business accounts to cover Sienna's minimum monthly payments just to maintain their perfect public image. "They are completely broke, Rebecca," Elijah stated firmly, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "Mitchell is drowning in toxic commercial real estate debt. Sienna is living in a massive financial delusion, thinking her credit cards are limitless. I am officially filing for divorce on Friday morning. I have gathered enough concrete evidence of financial infidelity to absolutely bury her in family court. I have absolutely zero loyalty left for Mitchell or his arrogant country club friends. That specifically includes Trent." I felt a massive wave of profound respect for Elijah. He was a brilliant, calculating man who fundamentally refused to be dragged down by the chaotic weight of my toxic family. He was executing his own meticulous escape plan just like I did. Which brings me to the massive corporate fire happening right outside the server room door. Elijah continued, shifting the conversation back to the Vanguard crisis. "The Vanguard board of directors is absolutely furious about the missing revenue. The corporate chairman flew in on his private jet from Chicago at dawn today. They are holding an emergency closed-door session in the main executive boardroom right now." I asked Elijah what the board of directors was planning to do about the catastrophic software failure. "They are preparing to terminate Trent by the end of the business day if this system is not fully restored," Elijah revealed, providing the exact explosive insider information I desperately needed. "The board does not care about his wealthy father or his elite country club connections. They only care about the millions Vanguard has lost. Trent is standing in front of a corporate firing squad, and he is frantically trying to point the massive gun directly at you. I asked him to clarify exactly what he meant by that disturbing statement. Check your secure email inbox right now, Elijah commanded urgently. I just forwarded you a highly confidential internal communication that Trent sent to the entire executive board 20 minutes ago. I opened my laptop and refreshed my secure inbox. A new message from Elijah was sitting at the top. I clicked the secure link and opened the forwarded document. It was an urgent memorandum drafted and signed by Vice President Trent. I read the text on the glowing screen. Trent explicitly claimed that the entire system outage was the direct result of a malicious cyber attack orchestrated by a rogue former employee. He stated that a disgruntled logistics manager named Rebecca was terminated on Monday for gross misconduct and subsequently unleashed a devastating virus into the Vanguard mainframe as an act of petty revenge. Trent formally requested the board authorize immediate criminal charges against me to shift the massive legal liability completely away from his department. He is incredibly desperate, Elijah said, listening to my silence over the phone line. He has absolutely no idea how the aerodynamic software actually operates. He thinks you manually hacked their servers from your living room. He is trying to serve you up on a silver platter to save his own miserable career. Let him make his desperate accusations. Elijah, I replied, feeling a cold, absolute certainty settle over my entire body. Trent is digging his own professional grave. He is about to learn a very expensive lesson about the true cost of unearned arrogance. Elijah let out a low, appreciative hum over the phone. I have to get back to the boardroom before they notice I am missing, he said. The chairman just demanded that Trent get the anonymous Aura Dynamics founder on the phone immediately. They are about to force a direct confrontation. Be ready, Rebecca. I sincerely thanked Elijah for the brilliant intelligence and disconnected the secure line. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the flashing red errors on the Vanguard network monitor. The board of directors was demanding my presence. Trent was actively accusing me of federal crimes. The 36-hour countdown was finally reaching its ultimate explosive conclusion. I stood up from my desk, smoothed out my custom-tailored power suit, and prepared to walk directly into the absolute corporate fire. While I walked to the private elevator to begin my journey across town, the atmosphere inside the Vanguard Logistics executive boardroom was completely suffocating. The room was dominated by a massive mahogany table, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. At the head of the table sat the chairman of the board. He had flown in from Chicago on his private jet at dawn specifically to address the massive financial hemorrhage. He was a ruthless man in his late 60s who built his entire career by tearing down inefficient corporations and selling off their broken parts. He did not care about internal office politics. He cared strictly about the bottom line. Trent stood at the opposite end of the long table. He was sweating profusely through his expensive custom suit. Next to him sat Gwen, the ruthless human resources director. She was clutching her legal binders, desperately trying to look invisible. The chairman leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He stared directly at Trent with eyes that held absolutely zero sympathy. We are currently losing $200,000 every single hour, Trent, the chairman, stated, his voice dangerously low and steady. Our entire fleet is completely paralyzed. I have major international clients calling my personal cell phone, threatening massive lawsuits. I want to know exactly how a company of this size was entirely brought to its knees overnight, and I want to know right now. Trent swallowed hard, pulling at his tight silk tie. Sir, we experienced a highly coordinated malicious cyber attack, he stammered, his voice cracking slightly under the intense pressure. I sent a detailed memorandum to the board this morning. A disgruntled logistics manager named Rebecca initiated a catastrophic virus when we terminated her yesterday. It was a direct act of petty revenge against this company. The chairman slammed his heavy hand flat against the mahogany table. The loud crack echoed through the silent boardroom, making Gwen visibly flinch. Do not lie to me, Trent, the chairman bellowed. We have our top forensic auditors tearing through the server room right now. They already confirmed this is not a virus. This is a deliberate automated firewall block initiated by Aura Dynamics. They locked us out of Project Titan completely. Our entire corporate infrastructure relies on that specific software to function properly. Trent frantically wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, leaving a dark smudge on his skin. "Sir, I understand the gravity of the situation," Trent pleaded, desperately trying to save his crumbling career. "But Aura Dynamics is being highly unprofessional. I have called their corporate support hotline a dozen times this morning. Their technical team is refusing to answer my emergency tickets. Their anonymous chief executive officer is actively ignoring my direct requests for an emergency meeting. They are holding our global supply chain hostage to extort us for more money." The chairman narrowed his eyes in disgust. The Vanguard board of directors did not care about Trent's wealthy father. They did not care that Mitchell played golf with their executive peers. Nepotism only protected you when the company was turning a healthy profit. When millions of dollars were suddenly vanishing into thin air, country club connections became absolutely worthless. The board knew that Vanguard desperately needed to sign the long-term merger contract with Aura Dynamics by the end of the quarter. Without Project Titan, Vanguard Logistics would be forced to file for massive corporate bankruptcy before the holidays. They needed that contract signed immediately. "You are the vice president of operations," Trent, the chairman, said, his tone dripping with sheer contempt. "It is your literal job to manage our external vendor relationships. If Aura Dynamics is completely ignoring you, it is because you have severely mismanaged this critical partnership. You claim their leadership is unprofessional, but you are the one standing in front of me with a completely broken supply chain and no immediate solutions." Gwen nervously opened her heavy legal binder, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Sir, our human resources department followed all standard protocols," she interrupted, trying to deflect the massive blame onto the software company. "We have a draft for a cease and desist letter ready to send to their legal department today. We can force them to restore the connection under the threat of a massive civil lawsuit for breach of contract." The chairman slowly turned his head to look at Gwen. "You will do absolutely no such thing," he commanded sharply. "We are not suing the only software firm capable of keeping this company afloat. We are going to resolve this immediately, like actual business professionals." The chairman reached across the table and grabbed the heavy black conference phone resting in the center of the mahogany wood. He pushed it directly toward Trent. "You are going to dial the Aura Dynamics corporate office right now," Trent, the chairman, ordered. "You are going to put the phone on speaker so this entire board can hear the conversation. You are going to get their chief executive officer on the line, and you are going to beg for their immediate assistance. Do it now." Trent stared at the black phone like it was a highly venomous snake. He knew he had absolutely zero leverage left. He reached out with a trembling hand and dialed the Aura Dynamics corporate number. He pressed the speaker button. The dial tone echoed loudly through the tense boardroom. It rang once. It rang twice. The heavy silence in the room was deafening. On the third ring, the line clicked open. A sharp professional voice filled the silent room. "This is the office of the General Counsel for Aura Dynamics," the voice stated clearly. "You have reached our corporate legal department. State your name and your urgent business." Trent practically choked on his own breath, gripping the edge of the table. "This is Vice President Trent from Vanguard Logistics," he stammered, leaning over the conference phone. "We are experiencing a critical failure on our network. I am demanding to speak with your Chief Executive Officer immediately. We need to resolve this massive outage right now before we take legal action." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. When the legal counsel spoke again, the voice was completely devoid of any warmth or patience. "We are entirely aware of the network situation at Vanguard Logistics, Trent," the lawyer replied smoothly. "Our chief executive officer has been personally monitoring the catastrophic fallout of your internal human resources decisions all morning." The chairman leaned forward instantly, recognizing the heavy implication of the lawyer's carefully chosen words. "What exactly does your leadership want to resolve this massive crisis?" the chairman asked, his voice cutting directly through the tension. The lawyer did not hesitate. "Our chief executive officer will not negotiate over the phone," the lawyer stated firmly. "The damage to our proprietary software integration is far too severe for a simple phone call. Our Chief Executive Officer is leaving the Aura Dynamics headquarters right now. They will arrive at your executive boardroom in exactly 1 hour to resolve this situation face to face. Have your entire board present. Do not be late. The line immediately clicked dead. The dial tone returned echoing through the completely stunned boardroom. Trent stared at the phone, his face draining of all remaining color. Gwen slowly closed her legal binder, realizing her career was entirely over. The chairman sat back in his heavy leather chair and folded his hands. The absolute trap was set and Trent had nowhere left to run. Exactly 1 hour later, the black town car pulled smoothly into the circular driveway of the Vanguard Logistics headquarters. It was Wednesday noon, marking exactly 36 hours since Gwen and Trent had gleefully escorted me out of the building. The heavy rain from the morning had cleared, leaving a harsh, bright sunlight reflecting off the towering glass windows. My private driver placed the vehicle in park and quickly stepped out to open my door. I stepped out onto the damp pavement. I was not the same exhausted, defeated logistics manager they discarded on Monday morning. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal power suit paired with a crisp white silk blouse. My hair was perfectly styled, and my posture was completely rigid with absolute confidence. I looked exactly like the multi-million-dollar tech executive I truly was. I adjusted my leather briefcase and looked up at the massive corporate logo bolted to the front of the skyscraper. As I stood in front of the massive corporate building, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. I thought about the thousands of hours I had sacrificed inside those glass walls. I remembered every single late night I spent staring at glowing spreadsheets while the rest of the executive team went home to their wealthy families. I reflected on every brilliant operational strategy I had carefully developed, only to watch Trent present it to the board of directors as his own personal genius. I remembered how he would constantly belittle my contributions in front of the junior staff intentionally, making me feel completely replaceable just to stroke his own massive ego. He built his entire vice president title using the bricks I carried on my own back. They thought they had broken my spirit entirely. They assumed I was just another desperate corporate subordinate who would silently accept their relentless abuse because I desperately needed the monthly paycheck to survive. Today was not just about securing a massive financial contract for Aura Dynamics. This walk to the elevator was about reclaiming my absolute dignity. It was about forcing the people who severely underestimated my worth to look me directly in the eyes while I dismantled their entire professional reality brick by brick. I walked through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped into the massive marble lobby of Vanguard Logistics. The atmosphere inside the building was completely chaotic. It was a beautiful symphony of corporate destruction. Junior executives were running frantically across the floor, clutching massive stacks of useless paper manifests. The reception desk phones were ringing constantly in a deafening chorus of corporate panic. I could hear dispatchers screaming at truck drivers over radio frequencies that no longer connected to the main database. I walked purposefully toward the main security checkpoint. The senior security guard standing behind the desk was the exact same man who had flanked me on Monday morning when Trent ordered my immediate removal. He looked up from his computer screen, and his eyes widened in absolute confusion. He recognized my face instantly. He knew I was a terminated employee who was strictly forbidden from entering the premises under the threat of trespassing charges. He instinctively reached for his radio to call for backup. I did not break my stride. I locked eyes with him and gave him a sharp, commanding nod. I projected an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. I was not sneaking into the building to beg for my job. I was walking through the front door like I owned the entire corporation. The security guard hesitated, his hand hovering nervously over his radio. His brain could not reconcile the terrified, fired employee from Monday with the incredibly powerful executive striding past him right now. By the time he finally decided to ask for my identification, I was already swiping a master visitor access card I had generated from the Aura Dynamics server. The glass turnstile beeped in green approval, and I walked straight through to the private executive elevator bank without ever looking back. I pressed the glowing button for the top floor. The heavy stainless steel doors slid shut completely, drowning out the chaotic noise of the frantic lobby. The elevator ascended rapidly, pulling me higher and higher above the absolute disaster unfolding in the logistics department below. The digital floor indicator climbed steadily upward, matching the intense rhythm of my own heartbeat. When the elevator doors finally opened on the executive floor, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was not loud and chaotic like the lobby. It was dead silent. It was the terrifying, heavy silence of absolute desperation. I walked past the row of empty cubicles where my former coworkers used to sit. The computer screens were all glowing with the exact same red firewall lock screen I had initiated from my own desk across the city. Nobody was typing. Nobody was talking. They were all just sitting perfectly still, waiting for the inevitable collapse of their careers. I bypassed my old small desk entirely. I did not even look at the sad cardboard box that was still sitting empty on the floor where I had left it. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the massive glass boardroom at the very end of the long hallway. The sound of my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor echoed loudly through the completely silent corridor. Every single step I took felt like a heavy hammer striking the nail directly into Trent's professional coffin. The tension in the air was incredibly thick. The remaining junior staff members who were hiding in their offices slowly leaned out into the hallway. They watched me walk toward the boardroom with absolute shock painted across their faces. They knew exactly who I was, but they could not comprehend why I was marching directly toward the most powerful men in the company. I reached the heavy double-glass doors of the executive boardroom. The blinds were drawn wide open, revealing the entire Vanguard board of directors sitting tensely around the mahogany table. Trent was standing near the digital projector, looking physically ill. Gwen was staring blankly at the wall. The chairman was checking his gold watch aggressively, waiting for the anonymous Aura Dynamics founder to arrive. They had absolutely no idea that the monster they created was standing right outside their door. I did not knock. I did not ask for permission to enter. I simply reached out, grabbed the polished silver handles, and prepared to push the heavy glass doors completely open. The 36 hours of waiting were officially over. The corporate reckoning had finally arrived. I pushed the heavy glass doors completely open. The thick metal hinges glided silently, but the sudden movement immediately drew the attention of every single person inside the executive boardroom. I stepped over the polished chrome threshold and let the doors swing shut behind me. The heavy glass sealed with a soft thud, instantly locking me inside the room with the most powerful figures in Vanguard logistics. The massive mahogany table stretched out before me, gleaming under the bright recessed lighting. At the far end of the long table sat the chairman of the board. His hands were clasped together, and his sharp eyes immediately locked onto my face. The rest of the board members, consisting of a dozen wealthy older men and women in expensive dark suits, all turned their heads in absolute unison. They looked annoyed by the sudden interruption, but none of them recognized me. To them, I was just a random woman in a charcoal power suit disrupting their critical emergency session. However, Trent and Gwen recognized me instantly. Trent was standing near the digital projection screen, wiping sweat from his forehead with a wrinkled silk handkerchief. When he looked up and saw me standing confidently at the entrance of the boardroom, his entire face contorted into a mask of pure disbelief. His brain literally short-circuited. For the past 5 years, Trent had viewed me entirely as his personal subordinate. I was the quiet workhorse who fixed his mistakes, fetched his reports, and absorbed his relentless verbal abuse without a single complaint. His massive, unearned arrogance completely blinded him to reality. He was so deeply conditioned to see me as a weak, defenseless employee that his mind physically could not process the image of me standing before him as an equal. The custom-tailored suit, the flawless posture, the absolute lack of fear in my eyes, none of it registered in his panicking brain. To Trent, I was just the desperate fired girl who was currently ruining his life. The blood rushed violently to his face, turning his skin a deep, mottled shade of purple. His shock instantly mutated into explosive, uncontrollable rage. Security. Trent screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking violently, echoing off the glass walls. "What the hell is she doing in here?" He pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. He looked completely unhinged, acting like a cornered animal lashing out blindly. Gwen jumped in her seat, dropping her heavy legal binder onto the floor with a loud crash. "Gwen, call the guards right now!" Trent ordered frantically, slamming his hand against the mahogany table. "She is actively trespassing. I fired her 2 days ago, and she is absolutely not allowed in this building. Get her out of here before she ruins everything." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, exchanging confused and irritated glances. They were already furious about the missing millions, and Trent's hysterical screaming was only making the situation significantly worse. Gwen scrambled desperately, trying to find her cell phone at the bottom of her designer handbag, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Trent did not wait for Gwen. He took a threatening step toward me, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of fake dominance. "This is the disgruntled ex-employee I warned you about, sir," he practically yelled, looking back at the chairman. "This is the woman who maliciously infected our servers with a virus. And now she has somehow snuck past the lobby security to sabotage our emergency meeting with the Aura Dynamics chief executive officer. She is completely insane. She knows they are arriving at any second, and she wants to humiliate us in front of them." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still near the entrance of the boardroom, letting Trent completely unravel in front of his wealthy superiors. His profound lack of emotional control was a massive liability, and he was displaying it for the entire room to witness. I calmly reached down and unclasped my leather briefcase. I pulled out a single pristine white folder containing the exclusive software licensing contract for Project Titan. I let the heavy leather briefcase drop onto an empty leather chair and stepped fully up to the mahogany table. "You need to leave this room immediately," Rebecca Trent hissed, stepping directly into my path to block my progress. "I am calling the police. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage and criminal trespassing. You have completely destroyed your own life, and I am going to make sure you spend the next 10 years in a federal prison." He was so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath and see the frantic desperation dancing in his terrified eyes. He thought he could still intimidate me by raising his voice and throwing out ridiculous legal threats. He still foolishly believed he held the high ground. Before I could even open my mouth to deliver the final crushing blow, a single commanding voice cut through the chaotic noise. "Enough," the chairman barked. The single word hit the boardroom like a physical shockwave. The sheer authority in his voice instantly silenced Trent's hysterical rambling. Trent snapped his mouth shut and stepped back as if he had been physically struck. Gwen completely froze, her hand still hovering over her cell phone screen. The entire room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The chairman slowly stood up from his heavy leather chair at the head of the table. He did not look at Trent. He did not look at Gwen. He bypassed the screaming vice president entirely and kept his sharp, evaluating gaze locked directly on me. He was a man who had survived 4 decades of brutal corporate warfare. He knew how to read people, and he knew how to recognize genuine power when it walked into his boardroom. He looked at my tailored suit, my relaxed posture, and the pristine white folder resting in my confident grip. He clearly recognized that I did not look like a desperate, disgruntled employee seeking petty revenge. I looked like a woman who was holding all the winning cards. The chairman raised a single weathered hand, demanding absolute silence from the rest of the board. He narrowed his calculating eyes, studying my face with intense scrutiny. "Who let you in, young lady?" the chairman asked, his voice dangerously calm and entirely devoid of any emotion. The question hung heavily in the tense boardroom air. Trent looked back and forth between me and the chairman, a sickening realization slowly beginning to form in the back of his panicked mind. I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany table, leaned forward slightly, and prepared to introduce myself properly. I pushed my hands off the polished mahogany table near the entrance and began a slow, deliberate walk down the entire length of the boardroom. The wealthy board members parted instinctively, pulling their heavy leather chairs back to give me a wide, unobstructed path. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like breathing underwater. Trent frantically tried to step in front of me again to block my progress, but the chairman raised a single sharp finger pointing directly at him. "Sit down and shut your mouth, Trent," the chairman ordered, his voice echoing with absolute finality. Trent practically collapsed into the nearest chair, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He looked like a puppet with its strings suddenly cut. I reached the head of the table, stopping directly opposite the chairman. I did not flinch under his intense, evaluating gaze. I opened my pristine white folder and pulled out a single thick piece of premium cardstock. I placed it perfectly in the center of the mahogany wood, pushing it smoothly toward the older man. The bright overhead lights caught the gold-embossed lettering, shining brightly against the dark surface. "Nobody let me in," I stated clearly, my voice echoing with crisp authority in the completely silent room. "You requested the presence of the founder and chief executive officer of Aura Dynamics. I am here." The heavy silence that followed my declaration was absolute perfection. It was the sweet, heavy sound of total karmic retribution. I watched the color completely drain from Trent's face, leaving him with a sickly pale gray complexion. He stared at the gold-embossed business card as if it were a live explosive device. His jaw was hanging open, but no sound came out. Next to him, Gwen let out a sharp, audible gasp. The expensive heavy metal pen slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered loudly onto the polished floor, rolling away into the shadows. She pressed both hands against her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer terror. She realized in real time that she had aggressively processed the termination paperwork for the single most important vendor in their global network. The chairman reached out and picked up the thick card. He studied the engraved letters, reading my name and my executive title. A slow, recognizing smile spread across his weathered face. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly impressed. He was a ruthless corporate predator, and he instantly recognized a flawless execution when he saw one. He placed the card gently back onto the table and leaned back in his heavy leather chair, giving me his full, undivided attention. I slowly turned my head and locked my icy gaze directly onto Trent. He was physically shrinking in his chair, completely destroyed by the massive reality of his own catastrophic arrogance. "As you told me on Monday," Trent, I said, my voice perfectly even and brutally calm, "I really needed to focus on my second job. So shall we review the damage your human resources department caused my software?" Trent opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic squeaking sound escaped his throat. He looked desperately at the other board members, pleading for help, but they were all glaring at him with pure, unfiltered hatred. They were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every single hour, and the man responsible was sitting right in front of them, sweating through his expensive suit. "Explain exactly what happened here," the chairman demanded, his voice cutting through the heavy tension. He looked directly at me, bypassing Trent entirely. I did not wait for Trent to formulate another pathetic lie. I pulled a thick stack of diagnostic reports from my white folder and slid them across the table toward the investors. Vanguard Logistics has been utilizing a beta version of Project Titan for the past 6 months, I explained, projecting my voice clearly to the entire room. It is a highly advanced automated logistics system tied directly to my personal developer credentials. When Trent and Gwen maliciously terminated my employment on Monday morning, they instructed your IT department to aggressively purge my administrative access and lock me out of the building. I paused, letting the heavy weight of those words settle over the angry board members. I looked directly at Gwen, who looked like she was about to physically vomit. The Project Titan software immediately recognized this massive access purge as a hostile internal threat. I continued, my tone entirely professional. The system enacted a total defensive lockdown to protect my proprietary algorithms. You did not experience a cyber attack today. Your brilliant vice president essentially unplugged the life support system of your entire global supply chain because he wanted to punish me for correcting his terrible quarterly reports. He burned down your entire corporation just to protect his fragile ego. and Gwen rubber stamped the entire disaster without asking a single question. The boardroom instantly erupted into a chaotic storm of angry shouts. The wealthy investors slammed their hands on the table, demanding Trent's immediate resignation. The chairman held up his hand, and the room instantly fell silent again. "What is it going to take to turn the system back on Rebecca?" the chairman asked, addressing me by my first name as an absolute equal. "We need that software functioning immediately. Name your terms." I stood perfectly straight, squaring my shoulders. The ultimate payoff had finally arrived. I was no longer negotiating for a simple software integration. I was dictating the unconditional surrender of Vanguard Logistics. "The original licensing contract I sent over last week is officially void," I stated firmly. "The new terms are non-negotiable. Aura Dynamics will require a $10 million emergency restoration fee wired into our corporate accounts by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Furthermore, the annual licensing fee for Project Titan has just been tripled. We require a mandatory 5-year contract signed in ink today." Trent practically choked on his own breath. $10 million, he gasped, his voice cracking violently. "That is absolute extortion. You cannot do this. Sir, you cannot let her do this." The chairman completely ignored him, keeping his eyes locked entirely on me. "And what else?" the chairman asked, knowing perfectly well that I was not finished. "And I require the immediate termination of Vice President Trent and Human Resources Director Gwen." I demanded, my voice ringing with absolute cold authority. "I will not integrate my highly advanced proprietary software with a company that employs incompetent management. They are massive liabilities to your bottom line, and they are a direct threat to my technology. You will fire them right now in front of me, and you will revoke their severance packages entirely for gross corporate negligence. If they are still sitting in those chairs in 60 seconds, I am walking out that door and taking Project Titan to your biggest competitor." The chairman did not hesitate for even a single fraction of a second. He turned his sharp, weathered face toward the far end of the mahogany table, locking his eyes onto the two completely defeated executives. His gaze was entirely devoid of any mercy or hesitation. "Trent and Gwen, you are both terminated effective immediately," the chairman stated, his voice booming with absolute finality. "Leave your corporate security badges on this table right now. You will receive absolutely no severance packages, and I am personally instructing our legal department to draft a massive civil lawsuit against both of you for gross financial negligence. Now get out of my boardroom before I have the security guards drag you out by your hair." Gwen let out a loud, pathetic sob. She shakily reached up, pulled the plastic security badge from her lapel, and dropped it onto the polished wood. Her hands were trembling violently. Trent remained completely paralyzed in his heavy leather chair. His mouth was opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. His entire wealthy, privileged reality was rapidly shattering into a million sharp, unfixable pieces. He was losing his prestigious title, his massive salary, and his entire professional reputation in front of the most powerful corporate investors in the city. "Do not leave just yet," I commanded sharply, cutting through the chaotic noise of the boardroom. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek silver tablet. "I want you both to sit right there and watch exactly how you destroyed your own careers." I walked around the edge of the mahogany table and firmly plugged my tablet directly into the primary boardroom projector system. The massive digital screen covering the entire back wall instantly flared to life, bathing the dark room in a sharp blue light. I tapped the glass screen of my tablet, bringing up a highly detailed, heavily documented digital presentation. I had not just come here to demand a massive contract and secure a financial victory. I came here to execute a flawless public execution of Trent's entire fabricated legacy. For the past 5 years, Vice President Trent has presented himself as a logistical genius to this entire board of directors. I began, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. He has consistently taken absolute credit for every major operational overhaul, every highly profitable supply chain strategy, and every massive technological advancement this company has implemented. He used those stolen achievements to secure massive annual bonuses and rapid executive promotions while keeping me trapped in a mid-level management position. I tapped the screen, and a massive block of complex software source code appeared on the projector. I highlighted a specific recurring line of code in bright yellow so the entire board could read it clearly. However, Trent possesses absolutely zero technical understanding of the software architecture he supposedly manages. I continued smoothly. He does not know how to code. He does not know how to build logistical algorithms. He only knows how to steal the hard work of his subordinates. Because I knew exactly what kind of ruthless corporate parasite he was, I kept meticulous receipts. Every single time Trent took credit for my foundational work, I quietly embedded my personal encrypted digital signature deep within the master source code. I swiped the tablet screen rapidly, flipping through dozens of highly classified Vanguard logistical programs. Every single file displayed my encrypted signature, proving undeniably that I was the sole architect of their entire modern infrastructure. The board members leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes wide with absolute shock. They were looking at 5 years of undeniable concrete evidence proving their star executive was nothing more than a pathetic fraud. Trent buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, miserable groan. He was entirely trapped and he knew it. But stealing my professional work was not his most catastrophic failure. I stated, my tone turning icy and dangerous. His ultimate failure occurred exactly 36 hours ago. I tapped the screen again, pulling up a massively blown-up digital image of my official termination paperwork. Gwen's signature was stamped brightly at the bottom of the page in harsh red ink. Next to the Human Resources document, I displayed the internal server logs from the Vanguard Information Technology Department. The exact timestamps on both documents aligned perfectly down to the very last millisecond. I drew a bright digital line connecting the two separate events on the projector screen, making the massive connection entirely undeniable. On Monday morning, Trent threw a massive temper tantrum because I corrected his flawed quarterly report in front of the junior staff, I explained, pointing at the glowing screen. He demanded my immediate termination to protect his fragile ego. Director Gwen aggressively rubber-stamped the firing without conducting a single standard exit interview. She then instructed your technical department to indiscriminately delete my master administrative account from your global network. I highlighted the specific command line on the server log that triggered the massive corporate blackout. Neither Trent nor Gwen bothered to realize that my personal administrative account was structurally bound to the foundational code of Project Titan, Y said, staring directly at the chairman. They recklessly deleted the master key to your entire global supply chain. My proprietary software immediately recognized the aggressive deletion as a hostile internal cyber attack. The system did exactly what it was programmed to do. It executed an automated defensive blackout to protect its core algorithms from unauthorized manipulation. Vanguard Logistics triggered its own catastrophic collapse. I did not hack your servers. Your incompetent management essentially unplugged the life support machine of your own corporation because they were too arrogant to understand how the machine actually functioned. The absolute truth hung heavily in the freezing boardroom air. The wealthy investors stared at the massive digital timeline, completely horrified by the staggering level of sheer executive incompetence on display. They had placed the entire future of their massive corporation into the hands of a man who did not even understand how his own computers worked. I tapped the glass screen of my tablet one final time. The massive display shifted, showing a live, highly complex financial dashboard. Red numbers were rapidly ticking upward in real time, spinning faster and faster as the global supply chain remained entirely paralyzed. Thanks to Trent's profound lack of basic operational oversight and Gwen's recklessly aggressive human resources protocols, your company is currently bleeding capital at an absolutely unprecedented rate. I announced, dropping the final devastating bomb onto the mahogany table. I have been carefully tracking the exact financial fallout of this system-wide failure. As of this exact second, Vanguard Logistics has lost exactly $2.4 million in the last 36 hours. The boardroom erupted into absolute chaos. The sheer magnitude of the financial destruction finally shattered the silent tension. Several board members began screaming loudly, demanding that Trent be permanently banned from the entire financial district. The chairman turned a brutal shade of red, gripping the edges of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. "Security!" the chairman roared, pressing the emergency intercom button on the conference phone. "Get up here right now and physically remove these two massive liabilities from my building." Trent and Gwen did not wait for the armed guards to arrive. Gwen practically sprinted for the heavy glass doors, sobbing loudly into her hands, completely destroyed by the reality of her shattered career. Trent stumbled awkwardly out of his leather chair, his face completely pale and devoid of any remaining arrogance. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with absolute helpless terror. I did not smile. I did not offer him a single ounce of pity. I just stared at him with cold, calculating eyes as he shuffled pathetically out of the executive boardroom, leaving his entire fabricated legacy in complete burning ruins. As Trent reached the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, he suddenly stopped. His hand hovered over the polished silver handle, but he did not push it open. The initial shock of his termination was rapidly fading, and the terrifying financial reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon him. He was not just losing his vice president title. If he was terminated for gross financial negligence, he would automatically forfeit his massive severance package and every single unvested stock option he had accumulated over the past 5 years. We were talking about millions of dollars vanishing into thin air. He slowly turned back around to face the mahogany table. His face was slick with cold sweat, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. He looked past me and stared directly at the chairman of the board. He was ready to play his absolute final card in a pathetic attempt to save his wealth. "Sir, you cannot do this to me," Trent pleaded, his voice shaking violently as he took a desperate step back into the room. "You know my father. You play golf with him at the massive country club every single weekend. Our families have deep financial connections in this city. If you strip my stock options and throw me out like a common criminal, my father will absolutely pull all of his private investment capital from this firm. He will rally the other shareholders against you. I made a mistake, but I can fix this. Just let me keep my vested shares." The chairman did not even blink. He leaned forward and rested his elbows heavily on the polished wood, staring at Trent with a look of pure, unfiltered disgust. The other wealthy investors around the table scoffed audibly at Trent's incredibly weak attempt at leverage. "Your father is a brilliant businessman, Trent," the chairman replied, his voice as cold and sharp as absolute ice. "And because he is a brilliant businessman, he will understand exactly why I am permanently severing ties with a massive liability who just cost my corporation $2.4 million in a single day. He will be far too embarrassed by your profound incompetence to ever mention your name on the golf course again. Do not ever try to threaten me with your family connections. Pack your boxes, Trent. You are done." Right on cue, the heavy glass doors swung open inward, forcing Trent to stumble awkwardly out of the way. Two massive corporate security guards stepped into the boardroom. They did not look friendly, and they were not there to gently escort him. They grabbed Trent firmly by his upper arms, practically lifting his expensive custom suit off the polished marble floor. "Get your hands off me!" Trent shrieked, thrashing wildly like a spoiled child throwing a massive tantrum. "I am a vice president. You work for me. You do not work here anymore," the senior guard stated flatly, tightening his iron grip on Trent's arm. They dragged him aggressively out into the long hallway. Trent's pathetic screams echoed loudly off the glass walls, growing fainter and fainter as they hauled him toward the service elevators. He was being completely stripped of his unearned power, his unvested stock options, and his remaining dignity, all at the exact same time. It was a beautiful symphony of absolute justice, and I savored every single second of his humiliating departure. The chairman watched the glass doors swing shut, finally sealing the massive executive boardroom in absolute silence once again. He let out a long, heavy sigh and rubbed his temples. The immediate cancerous threat of Trent and Gwen had been surgically removed from the building, but the Vanguard logistics network was still entirely paralyzed. The massive digital projector behind me was still flashing bright red warning signs, and the automated financial counter was still ticking rapidly upward, proving the company was bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars by the hour. The chairman slowly turned his sharp, evaluating gaze back to me. The anger in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a stark, calculating business pragmatism. He knew his entire board of directors was completely at my absolute mercy. "All right, Rebecca," the chairman said, his tone shifting into a serious negotiation register. "The massive liabilities have been permanently removed from the equation. Your brilliant point has been successfully proven, and we have all witnessed the unvarnished truth of our internal management failures. Now tell me exactly what it is going to take for Aura Dynamics to restore our global grid and sign the long-term merger contract today. We cannot afford to lose another single hour of operational revenue." I reached down and tapped the screen of my silver tablet, pausing the terrifying financial counter on the projector. I wanted them to have my full, undivided attention. "Aura Dynamics does not do business with incompetent liabilities," I stated, projecting my voice clearly across the large boardroom. "We build highly advanced technical infrastructure for elite corporations. Your massive internal failure today proved that your technical oversight is severely lacking. That represents a massive operational risk to my proprietary software, and I require heavy financial compensation for taking on that massive risk." I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands firmly on the mahogany table. I locked eyes with the chairman, refusing to break his intense gaze. "I will restore your entire global grid and sign the massive 5-year merger contract right now on 2 strict conditions," I announced, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "First, the immediate termination and removal of Trent and Gwen, which you have already successfully executed. Second, I am officially rewriting the financial terms of our vendor agreement. Aura Dynamics will now require a mandatory 20% increase in all of our baseline vendor fees across the board. This massive increase will be permanently locked into the new contract." The wealthy investors around the table immediately began to whisper frantically among themselves. A 20% increase on a massive corporate software contract represented millions of dollars in additional annual expenses for Vanguard Logistics. It was a ruthless, brutal demand that would significantly impact their quarterly profit margins. One of the senior board members, a woman in a sharp navy suit, slammed her hand on the table. "A 20% increase is absolute highway robbery," she argued aggressively. "We are already paying premium market rates for Project Titan." I slowly turned my head and looked directly at her. "You are currently losing over $1 million every 12 hours, I reminded her coldly, pointing directly at the massive red projector screen. "My 20% vendor increase is a tiny fraction of the absolute fortune you will lose if I walk out of this building and leave your entire supply chain permanently crippled. You do not have any leverage to negotiate. You are buying a highly sophisticated digital life raft, and the ship is already completely underwater." The chairman held up his hand, instantly silencing the angry board member. He looked at the terrifying red numbers on the screen, and then he looked back at me. He recognized that I was absolutely holding all the winning cards, and he respected my sheer ruthlessness. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. "Draft the addendum immediately," the chairman ordered, looking over at the lead corporate attorney sitting nervously in the corner of the room. "Give her the massive 20% fee increase. Print the new contract right now so we can sign it in ink." The boardroom descended into a flurry of frantic legal activity. Within 10 minutes, a freshly printed stack of heavy legal documents was placed directly in front of me on the mahogany table. I read through every single line, meticulously verifying that the massive 20% fee increase and the 5-year lock-in period were completely ironclad. I took the chairman's gold pen and signed my name on the dotted line, officially securing one of the most lucrative software contracts in the entire financial district. The second the ink dried on the final page, I picked up my silver tablet. I entered my secure administrative credentials and typed in the complex override command. I hit the green enter button. Instantly, the massive projector screen behind me shifted. The terrifying flashing red warning signs vanished completely. A wave of solid green operational lights cascaded rapidly across the digital dashboard. The automated supply chain reconnected instantly, restoring dispatch communications, tracking software, and regional warehouse routing protocols. The room let out a massive collective sigh of sheer relief as the Vanguard network roared back to perfect life. I closed my pristine white folder, smiled at the chairman, and walked out of the boardroom, a complete, undisputed victor. While the executive team scrambled to finalize the legal paperwork, I walked away from the heavy mahogany table and approached the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, overlooking the primary executive hallway. I poured myself a glass of ice water from the boardroom refreshment station and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid felt incredibly refreshing against my throat. Outside the glass room, the entire floor had come to a complete standstill. Two imposing security guards in dark uniforms were currently escorting Trent and Gwen down the corridor. They were the exact same guards who had flanked me on Monday morning when Trent ordered my humiliating removal. Back then, those guards had looked at me with cold indifference, viewing me as just another disposable employee, being cast aside by corporate management. Today, those same guards were holding Trent and Gwen by their shoulders with firm, uncompromising efficiency. Gwen was sobbing uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking violently as mascara ran down her pale cheeks in messy black streaks. She held a single crushed folder against her chest, her confidence completely destroyed. Trent was entirely unhinged. His face was a dark, furious shade of red as he tried to pull away from the guards, shouting threats that nobody was listening to. He looked pathetic. 2 days ago, he believed he was an untouchable king ruling over an empire he did not build. Now he was being marched out like a common criminal in front of the entire staff he had tormented for years. I raised my glass of ice water slightly toward the glass wall, silently acknowledging the sheer perfection of corporate karma. Watching them crumble was deeply satisfying, but it also brought a quiet sense of profound clarity to my mind. For years, I had believed that I needed my family's approval and validation. I had tolerated Mitchell's abusive financial threats and Sienna's spoiled arrogance because a small, naive part of me still hoped they would recognize my talent and worth. I thought if I worked hard enough and endured enough pain, my parents would finally treat me like a daughter instead of a convenient financial asset. Standing inside that high-level boardroom watching my oppressors fall, I realized how absurd that dream had been. I did not need Mitchell's validation. I did not need my grandfather's trust fund. I did not need anyone's permission to be successful. I did not win today because my family supported me. I won because I was smarter, sharper, and far more prepared than the arrogant bullies who had spent years holding me down. I had built a multi-million-dollar empire entirely in the shadows while they were busy playing shallow corporate politics. The satisfaction of knowing that I owed my ultimate victory to no one but myself was far sweeter than any trust fund Mitchell could ever hold over my head. I turned back toward the mahogany table as the lead corporate attorney placed the finalized merger documents in front of the chairman. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from chaotic desperation to quiet respect. The chairman picked up his heavy gold fountain pen and carefully reviewed the modified clauses. The contract now officially bound Vanguard Logistics to a massive $40 million 5-year agreement with Aura Dynamics, complete with the non-negotiable 20% vendor fee increase and the mandatory $10 million upfront system restoration fee. The chairman signed his name in bold black ink across the bottom of each page. He capped his gold pen, picked up the executed master copy, and handed it directly to me across the table. "It is an absolute pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Mitchell," the chairman said, standing up and extending his hand toward me. "You are without a doubt the most formidable negotiator I have ever sat across from in my 40 years of corporate business." I shook his hand with a firm, confident grip. "The pleasure is entirely mine," I replied smoothly. "I assure you that Project Titan will keep your global operations running with flawless efficiency, provided your management team continues to respect our operational boundaries." The chairman let out a quiet laugh. "I can guarantee you that no one in this company will ever mistake your authority again," he assured me. I carefully placed the $40 million contract inside my pristine white folder and slid it into my heavy leather briefcase. I snapped the silver clasps shut, picked up my tablet, and gave the board members a crisp, professional nod. I turned on my heels and walked out of the executive boardroom, leaving the powerful directors to pick up the pieces of their broken corporate structure. I took the private elevator down to the lobby. The heavy stainless steel doors opened to reveal a transformed workplace. The chaos from an hour ago had completely vanished. The giant digital displays across the operations center were glowing green, showing live tracking data and smooth logistical routes. Junior dispatchers were quietly working at their desks, relief evident on their faces as the system processed their backlogged shipments. My software had restored order to their world in less than 10 minutes. I stepped out through the heavy revolving glass doors into the crisp afternoon air. The circular driveway was quiet. A short distance away near the lower parking lot, I spotted a lone figure standing beside a sleek sports car. It was Trent. He was standing alone on the damp pavement looking completely disheveled. His expensive custom suit jacket was wrinkled, his silk tie was loosened, and he was clutching a small damp cardboard box containing the pathetic remnants of his personal desk items. A few cheap plastic pens and a dusty framed desk photo were sitting at the bottom of the box. Trent turned his head and saw me stepping out onto the granite plaza. The moment his eyes locked onto mine, a wave of pure, unfiltered venom washed over his pale face. He glared at me with absolute hatred, his hands tightening around the damp cardboard so hard the paper began to crush in his grip. He had lost his title, his fortune, his stock options, and his pride, and he blamed me for every single second of his ruin. I stood at the top of the granite steps looking down at him from a position of total, untouchable power. I did not laugh. I did not taunt him or offer a gloating remark. He was far beneath me now, a discarded relic of a company I had completely conquered. I simply gave Trent a polite, distant corporate nod, the exact same dismissive gesture one would give to a complete stranger. I turned toward the curb where my sleek black town car was waiting. My driver immediately stepped forward and held the rear door open for me. I slid gracefully into the plush leather interior, the heavy door closing with a soft, satisfying thud that completely erased Trent from my sight. As the town car pulled smoothly out of the driveway, I leaned back against the headrest and prepared for the next phase of my plan. The rest of Wednesday and the entirety of Thursday passed in a blur of aggressive corporate restructuring. My technical team at Aura Dynamics spent 48 straight hours fortifying the Vanguard logistics grid under my direct supervision. By the time Friday morning arrived, the massive $40 million contract was fully processed, and the $10 million upfront fee was sitting comfortably inside my corporate accounts. I woke up early in my luxury downtown penthouse apartment, feeling an unprecedented level of peace. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. I picked up my tablet from the sleek kitchen island and opened the primary financial news applications. The massive corporate shakeup at Vanguard had not stayed quiet for long. The digital front page of the leading financial journal featured a massive, bold headline that made me smile into my coffee cup. Tech prodigy, Rebecca secures massive Vanguard contract. The article was a highly detailed breakdown of the entire merger. It explicitly detailed Trent's disgraceful firing for gross negligence and highlighted my sudden rise from the shadows. Financial analysts had already begun analyzing the market value of Aura Dynamics based on the new vendor fees. My personal net worth was publicly estimated to be well into the tens of millions. The secret was officially out. The entire financial district now knew exactly who I was, and more importantly, my toxic family finally knew exactly how much money I had. I set the tablet down and leaned against the marble counter. Toxic families operate on a very specific and highly predictable cycle of abuse and opportunism. For my entire life, I was the designated family scapegoat. I was the punching bag they used to make themselves feel superior. But the moment the scapegoat suddenly acquires massive, undeniable wealth, the entire narrative immediately shifts. I knew exactly what was coming. I was about to be instantly rebranded from the massive family disappointment to the absolute pride of the family. They would conveniently forget every single terrible thing they had ever said to me, and they would expect me to simply open my checkbook to fund their failing lifestyles. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the sharp buzz of the penthouse intercom system. I walked over to the digital panel mounted on the wall and pressed the speaker button. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," the concierge said, his voice echoing smoothly through the apartment. "I apologize for the early interruption, but you have 3 unauthorized guests in the main lobby: a Mr. Mitchell, a Mrs. Helen, and a young woman who says she is your sister Sienna. They are being quite loud, and they are aggressively demanding that I grant them immediate access to your private elevator. I can call building security to have them escorted out if you prefer." I felt a cold, sharp thrill run down my spine. The final boss of my lifelong trauma had just walked directly into my fortress. Elijah was right. They were completely broke and desperate. They had seen the morning financial news, and they immediately rushed to my luxury building to stake their claim on my new fortune. They expected to find the same weak girl they had bullied at the steakhouse on Monday night. They had absolutely no idea they were walking into a massive trap. "Do not call security," I instructed the concierge, keeping my voice perfectly calm and collected. "Please grant them access to the private elevator and send them directly up to the penthouse." I released the button and stepped back from the panel. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and quickly changed out of my silk pajamas. I put on a pair of sharp-tailored trousers and a high-neck cashmere sweater. I wanted to look completely relaxed but entirely untouchable. I walked back out into the massive open-concept living room. The space was pristine, featuring imported Italian leather furniture, a grand piano, and millions of dollars of curated modern art. It was a massive physical manifestation of my absolute success. I stood in the center of the room and waited. The soft chime of the private elevator echoed through the massive foyer. The heavy oak doors slid open and my parents stepped directly into my penthouse, followed closely by Sienna. They all stopped dead in their tracks, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the luxury surrounding them. Mitchell was wearing his usual expensive golf polo, but his face looked incredibly tired and stressed. Helen was clutching her designer handbag, staring at my massive chandelier with her mouth hanging wide open. Sienna looked absolutely devastated. She was wearing a massive pair of designer sunglasses, pushing them up onto her head as her eyes darted frantically around my pristine apartment. The burning jealousy radiating off my sister was so intense, it was practically visible. "Rebecca, sweetheart," Helen gasped, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was dripping with a sickeningly fake warmth that made my stomach completely turn. "We saw the morning news. We came over as soon as we could find the address to your corporate holding company. This place is absolutely incredible." Mitchell stepped forward, forcing a massive proud smile onto his face. It was the exact same fake smile he used when trying to secure a loan from his country club friends. "I always knew you had it in you, Rebecca," he declared, puffing out his chest. "Building a massive tech company entirely on your own. You are a brilliant businesswoman. You absolutely get your ruthless drive from me. I could not be more proud of my eldest daughter." I did not move a single inch. I just stood in the center of my massive living room, watching them desperately try to rewrite our entire history. 2 days ago, Mitchell had screamed at me over the phone, threatening to legally dissolve my grandfather trust fund and give it all to Sienna to buy a vacation home. Now he was standing in my penthouse, claiming he was the absolute source of my massive success. Sienna stepped out from behind our mother, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her eyes were practically glowing with toxic envy. "So this is where you have been hiding," she snapped, her tone dripping with bitter resentment. "You let Mom and Dad pay for your dinner on Monday night, while you were secretly sitting on tens of millions of dollars. That is incredibly selfish, Rebecca. We are your family. You should have told us you were building a massive corporate empire instead of letting us worry about your financial stability." I let out a slow, dry laugh that echoed loudly against the massive glass windows. The sheer audacity of her statement was absolutely breathtaking. I slowly walked over to the kitchen island and picked up my tablet. I did not invite them up here to play happy family. I invited them up here to finally execute the exact same ruthless corporate dismantling I had performed on Trent and Gwen. I looked directly at my father, watching the fake smile slowly begin to melt off his face. "You did not come here to congratulate me, Dad," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You came here because your commercial real estate business is completely bankrupt. You came here because Elijah officially filed for divorce from Sienna this morning, and you are rapidly drowning in her massive fraudulent credit card debt. You saw the morning headline and you realized your family scapegoat is now your only remaining financial lifeline. The color instantly drained from Mitchell's face. Helen's fake warm smile vanished, completely replaced by a look of sheer terror. Sienna's jaw dropped open, her arms falling limply to her sides. The continuous escalating conflict had finally breached the pristine walls of our toxic family dynamic, and the absolute truth was now standing right in front of them with a massive bank account and absolutely zero mercy. The heavy silence in the penthouse lasted for exactly 10 seconds before my mother decided to completely ignore reality. Helen rushed forward with her arms thrown wide open, her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. Massive crocodile tears sprang instantly to her eyes, completely bypassing the devastating truth I had just laid out before them. "Oh, Rebecca, you are just so overwhelmed from running this massive company," she cooed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion as she tried to wrap me in a suffocating hug. "We always knew you were an absolute genius. Everything we did was just our way of pushing you to reach your full potential. We did it out of love." I took a single sharp step back, letting her arms grasp nothing but empty air. Helen stumbled slightly, her fake warm smile freezing into a tight, awkward grimace. The forced pleasantries dropped completely within 3 agonizing minutes. Realizing that the emotional manipulation tactic was a massive failure, Mitchell instantly shifted gears. He fell back on the only language he actually understood, which was aggressive financial transaction. He cleared his throat, smoothed down the front of his expensive golf polo, and adopted his most patronizing country club business persona. "Look, let us just put all this ugly family drama behind us," Mitchell said, waving his hand dismissively as if he was swatting away a minor annoyance. "We are blood, Rebecca. That is what truly matters. You are correct about the business. My commercial real estate firm is experiencing a highly unfortunate temporary cash flow issue. I am drowning in toxic overhead. I just need a simple bridge loan to keep the lights on until the quarter ends. I need $500,000 wired to my business account by Monday. It is absolute pocket change for a tech executive like you, and it will save the family legacy." Sienna suddenly snapped out of her shocked trance. She realized Mitchell was actively trying to secure the only available cash in the room, and panic completely overtook her. She violently shoved past our father, sending her massive designer sunglasses clattering onto the marble floor. Real tears of sheer terror streamed down her perfectly contoured face. "No, you have to help me first," Sienna sobbed hysterically, her voice reaching a frantic, high-pitched shriek. "Elijah locked all of our joint bank accounts early this morning. He took my name off everything. I have $80,000 in secret credit card debt, and the banks are threatening to sue me by the end of the month. You have to pay it off right now, Rebecca. Sisters help each other. You cannot just sit up here in this luxury penthouse and let your own flesh and blood go bankrupt." I stared at the 3 of them in absolute disgust. They stood in the center of my pristine living room, begging for hundreds of thousands of dollars, acting as if the horrific steakhouse dinner from earlier in the week had never even happened. They completely erased the decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, and the cruel financial threats Mitchell had hurled at me over the phone just 48 hours prior. To my toxic family, I was no longer a living, breathing human being. I was just a massive, walking, automated teller machine, and they were furiously pounding on the glass, expecting the cash to pour out. I turned my back on their pathetic display and calmly walked over to the sleek kitchen island. I did not raise my voice. I did not let my heart rate spike. I remained in a state of terrifying, absolute calm. I picked up the silver thermal carafe and slowly poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. The rich aroma filled the massive space between us, completely masking the stench of their desperate greed. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the heavy silence stretch out until the tension in the room was sharp enough to cut glass. I wanted them to sit in their own suffocating panic for just a few seconds longer. I set the ceramic mug down on the marble counter, I turned back around and looked directly into my father's terrified eyes. 3 days ago, you called me an absolute disgrace. I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You sat at that high-end steakhouse and told me I was a massive failure. You explicitly threatened to legally dissolve my grandfather's trust fund and steal my remaining inheritance just to buy Sienna a luxury vacation home. You mocked my career and you laughed in my face. I shifted my cold gaze to my mother, who was still pretending to cry, and then to my sister, who was shaking with selfish terror. You do not want a daughter, Mitchell. I continued, my tone completely devoid of any empathy. You do not want a sister, Sienna. You want an automated teller machine. You want a blind financial savior to clean up your massive catastrophic mistakes. And the answer is absolutely no. I am not giving you a single cent, not today and not ever. The finality of my words hit Mitchell like a physical blow. The last fragile remnants of his fake country club smile vanished entirely. His face rapidly morphed from pale gray to an alarming shade of dark purple. The thick veins in his neck bulged dangerously against his expensive golf polo as pure, unhinged rage completely consumed his mind. He lunged forward, stabbing his finger aggressively in the air toward my face. You cold, ungrateful child! Mitchell screamed, his voice echoing violently off the massive glass windows. We put a roof over your head. We paid for your entire childhood. You owe us everything you have. You are legally obligated to help this family survive this financial crisis. I am your father, and you will write me a check right now. Right on cue, Helen immediately escalated her emotional manipulation tactics. Realizing that Mitchell's aggressive screaming was completely failing to intimidate me, she clutched her designer handbag to her chest and began to hyperventilate loudly. She stumbled backward and collapsed heavily onto my imported Italian leather sofa, gasping for air in a highly theatrical display of manufactured medical distress. Sienna dropped to her knees beside the sofa, joining our mother in a synchronized chorus of frantic weeping. She wailed about her impending lawsuits and begged for someone to save her from the aggressive debt collectors. Helen fanned her face frantically with her free hand, crying dramatically about her failing heart, and how my cruel selfishness was physically sending her to an early grave. It was a pathetic, desperate performance meant to trigger my childhood guilt, but I just stood there sipping my coffee and watching them fall apart with absolute indifference. As Helen continued her theatrical gasping on my imported leather sofa, and Sienna wailed loudly into her hands, the soft chime of the private elevator echoed through the massive foyer once again. The heavy oak doors slid open and Elijah stepped directly into the penthouse. He was wearing a sharp-tailored charcoal suit and carrying a sleek leather briefcase in his right hand. His expression was completely exhausted, but entirely resolute. Sienna snapped her head up. Her tear-streaked face immediately lit up with desperate, fabricated hope. "Elijah!" she shrieked, scrambling off the floor and rushing aggressively toward him. "You have to talk some sense into my sister. She is sitting on tens of millions of dollars, and she is completely refusing to help us. She is letting the bank sue me. Tell her she has to pay off my credit cards right now." Elijah did not even flinch. He smoothly sidestepped her frantic grasp, completely bypassing her, as if she was nothing more than a minor nuisance. He walked straight past his screaming wife and approached the kitchen island where I was standing. He extended his right hand toward me. "Congratulations on the massive Vanguard Logistics deal, Rebecca," he said, his voice steady and respectful. "I saw the morning financial headlines. It was a brilliant and utterly ruthless corporate maneuver. You completely outsmarted all of them." I shook his hand firmly, setting my coffee mug down on the marble counter. "Thank you, Elijah," I replied smoothly. It was certainly a long time coming. Elijah released my hand and finally turned around to face the absolute chaos happening in my living room. He walked slowly over to the center of the room and stopped right in front of my expensive glass coffee table. He unlatched the silver clasps on his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents bound by a sturdy black clip. He dropped the massive stack directly onto the glass surface with a loud, definitive thud that instantly silenced the entire room. "Those are the finalized divorce papers," Sienna Elijah announced, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. "I stayed up all night with my legal team completing a full, exhaustive forensic audit on every single one of our joint banking accounts. The final results were absolutely catastrophic. You have completely bankrupted us to fund your pathetic fake luxury lifestyle." Sienna stared at the heavy stack of legal papers as if it was an active explosive device. "And what is significantly worse," Elijah continued, his voice rising with intense, cold anger, "I found the exact paper trail proving that your parents explicitly helped you hide this massive toxic debt from me for over 2 years. You lied to me, you stole from me, and you destroyed our entire financial future. I am officially done playing this sick game with your deeply toxic family. I am out." Sienna let out a blood-curdling scream of pure, unadulterated terror and collapsed heavily back onto the hardwood floor, dissolving into violent, uncontrollable hysterics. Mitchell and Helen were left completely paralyzed. The fake theatrical medical distress instantly vanished from Helen's face. Mitchell stood completely frozen, his mouth hanging wide open in sheer disbelief. Their entire carefully constructed world of fake country club status and stolen wealth was rapidly crumbling to absolute dust right in front of their eyes. Elijah stood incredibly tall and completely unbothered by the chaotic weeping happening on the expensive hardwood floor. Mitchell finally found his voice after a full minute of paralyzed shock. He started sputtering completely incoherent threats about aggressive legal action and the sacred bonds of family loyalty. But Elijah simply raised his right hand and pointed directly toward the private elevator. The sharp gesture was absolute and completely final. There would be no prolonged negotiations. There would be absolutely no financial bailouts today. Helen quickly realized the theatrical performance was completely over, and they had entirely lost their only remaining audience. She aggressively grabbed her designer handbag and furiously yanked Sienna off the imported leather sofa. Sienna was practically hyperventilating, her breath catching in jagged, terrified gasps as heavy black mascara streamed down her pale face. She clutched the heavy stack of divorce papers tightly to her chest like a physical shield. Mitchell glared at me one last time with a look of pure defeated venom before quickly turning on his heel. The three of them scrambled awkwardly toward the elevator like terrified rats fleeing a rapidly sinking ship. The heavy oak doors slid shut loudly, instantly sealing them inside the descending steel box. The exact moment the elevator chime faded, an immense, overwhelming silence washed over the entire luxury penthouse. I slowly walked over to the digital control panel mounted on the wall and permanently revoked all of their building access codes. I watched the heavy biometric lock click firmly into place, ensuring they could never ambush me again. I leaned against the cold metal door, closed my eyes, and took a massive deep breath. The air in my home finally felt completely clean. The suffocating heavy weight of their toxic expectations, their endless financial greed, and their relentless emotional manipulation was permanently gone. I opened my eyes and looked over at Elijah, who was quietly snapping his sleek leather briefcase shut. We exchanged a silent, knowing nod of mutual respect. We had both successfully amputated the most deeply cancerous elements of our lives in a single morning. 6 months later, the absolute brutal reality of their financial destruction was permanently cemented into their daily lives. Mitchell could no longer hide his massive corporate failures behind his fake country club smile or his aggressive intimidation tactics. His commercial real estate firm completely collapsed under the crushing weight of his toxic overhead and unpaid loans. He was aggressively forced to file for complete bankruptcy. The state publicly liquidated his precious elite golf memberships, his luxury imported vehicles, and his massive suburban mansion just to satisfy the relentless aggressive creditors. Helen was utterly humiliated by the public spectacle. She was entirely cut off from the wealthy elite social circles she had spent decades desperately trying to impress, now forced to rent a mediocre house in a severely downgraded neighborhood. Sienna faced a brutal, terrifying awakening of her own. Without Elijah's high income and with absolute zero access to my new massive fortune, she was violently thrown into the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world. The aggressive debt collectors seized all of her expensive designer assets. She was completely forced to move out of her luxury townhouse and into a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the rough, industrial edge of the city. To pay off the massive mountain of fraudulent credit card debt she had secretly accumulated, she had to take a grueling minimum wage retail job at a cheap discount clothing store. Every single day, she had to stand on her aching feet for 8 miserable hours folding cheap polyester sweaters and dealing with highly aggressive, angry customers. She was completely stripped of her spoiled arrogance and left entirely alone with her massive mistakes. Trent did not fare any better out in the brutal corporate world. The massive breaking news of his disgraceful immediate termination from Vanguard Logistics spread through the elite corporate financial sector like absolute wildfire. He was permanently blacklisted from the entire global logistics industry. No reputable technology or shipping firm would ever trust him with their delicate operational infrastructure again. Stripped completely of his massive unvested stock options and his prestigious vice president title, he was humiliatingly forced to take a miserable mid-level sales job selling cheap plastic printer toner over the phone. He spent his long, depressing days making endless cold calls to completely disinterested office managers, trying to earn a meager, desperate commission while bitterly watching my tech company continuously dominate the global market on the evening news. Meanwhile, Aura Dynamics experienced an unprecedented massive explosion of exponential financial growth. The incredible $40 million Vanguard contract proved to be the ultimate powerful catalyst for our corporate expansion. Within just 6 quick months, we aggressively expanded our digital operations globally, successfully securing massive lucrative government contracts and elite international corporate partnerships. My proprietary digital software empire was absolutely untouchable. I sat comfortably in my massive corner office overlooking the sprawling, beautiful city skyline. The heavy glass walls were pristine. The daily atmosphere was completely focused, and the operational energy was entirely positive. I was finally surrounded only by brilliant, dedicated professionals who truly valued my intense leadership and my technical genius. The heavy oak door to my office opened, and Elijah walked in, carrying a pristine white folder. Immediately after finalizing his grueling, messy divorce from my sister, I had aggressively recruited him. He was now the official highly paid chief financial officer of Aura Dynamics, bringing his brilliant, precise financial auditing skills to an empire that actually respected his immense talent. He placed the glowing quarterly earnings report directly on my polished mahogany desk, smiled brightly, and walked back out into the busy hallway. I took a sip of my dark roast coffee completely and absolutely at peace. Sometimes the absolute best thing someone can do is fire you, reject you, and aggressively throw you to the wolves, because out there in the freezing cold is exactly where you learn how to build an absolute empire. Have you ever had a deeply toxic boss or a severely manipulative family member completely underestimate you? Tell me exactly how you proved them completely wrong in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories of surviving the brutal corporate and family trenches.